Welcome, everybody. This is the first session for Black History Conversations, Season 16. Season 16. I can't believe this. Anyway, I'm just going to go through a few points and then we're going to go over to Leslie Evans. Leslie's here with me. We're in a kitchen together today, so it's good and friendly here, isn't it? Okay, then. So let me just move on then. So the focus for today, when Leslie's talking, is going to be about Gifford Pennant. Who was he and why are we talking about him? Okay, right. So how do you click this onto the next one? Just a minute. Here we are. Okay, well, we're Learning Links International. That's Simon, myself, and apologies from Garrick Prayog. We have other directors, but Learning Links International is a social enterprise that started Black History Conversations together way back in 2020, maybe 2019. Can't really remember now, it's so long ago. Anyway, I'm much appreciative to Simon for doing the techie things. Apologies from me because I do the messing up, the sending out the wrong information. Sorry about that. And Garrick will be joining us again in a few weeks. So we acknowledge, as Black History Conversations, the injustice of the actions taken by the British and other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands in the Caribbean Sea, as well as the countries and continents of North and South America. In addition, we also recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia, Australia, and many other parts of the world in the centuries of colonisation and ongoing exploitation. We acknowledge that this has resulted in the destruction and destabilization of so many nations, peoples, and cultures, with so many people enslaved. And we thank Jackie Pennant for the motivation to have an acknowledgement here on Black History Conversations. So we thank Jackie Pennant. Just to let you know that the Runnymede Trust have just published a really interesting report, which is on reparations. Reparations is something that we talk about and some things that we feel we're doing. We feel we're doing community reparation. We're working with colleagues in Jamaica. We're looking at our shared history, and we're also looking at how collectively we can support one another. So it'll be interesting one week to have a further look at this, but that's the link there. It's on the runnymeadtrust.org page. Also, just to say that a good colleague of mine who we met through the Sheep to Sugar project, Caroline. Caroline's on the screen at the moment, and we ran a conference in Cardiff, and Lucille Juncker was there, and she presented at the event, and now she's doing a Welsh wool slavery and identity exhibition with some activities going on at the Welsh Woolen Museum. So look out for that. And if you want any more information, you can either contact me or look on the National Museums of Wales site. So that's going to be good coming up. Now, just to say that this was out of the previous bit. I've got my slides out of order. What did I say about stress? And this is some of the things that are in the previous thing that we were talking about, the Runnymede Trust report. Anyway, today we're going to welcome Leslie Evans. Leslie's a good friend who's undertaking research for a project we're calling Fiwi Story, or Our Stories. This project's focused on those enslaved people, many taken from their homelands and transported as chattel to work till they died, and others born into slavery, and they knew no other life. But for the next 3 weeks, Leslie's going to tell us what she's found out about the lives of three men. Gifford Pennant, founder of the Pennant dynasty, born in North Wales, died in Jamaica. His son Edward Pennant, born and died in Jamaica. And his grandson John Pennant, born in Jamaica but travelled to Wales and then took his family's plantation wealth with him and left his plantations being managed by agents. The Pennant family, harking back to the comments earlier about the reparations, Britain paid vast sums in reparations to those who lost the use of enslaved labour, not to the people who'd been enslaved. So that's quite an interesting mix there. So I think that this is the end of where I'm at. Oh no, just to show you, for those of you who may not be aware, that Penrhyn Castle, which was built in around 1826, I think I might have got that wrong, to show off the wealth of the Penrhyn family. It's now owned by the National Trust. And also, the work that Leslie's doing is on the slave registers and other sources of information which name the enslaved workforce. Now, this is an ongoing project, and this isn't what we're talking about at the moment, but we're giving the background of the plantation ownership over the next 3 weeks so you'll understand. And one of the plantations that Leslie will be talking about, the map there underneath, the map of the Denby plantation. So that's all to set the context. So I'm now going to share the screen. Welcome to you all. It's good to have you join us. Barrington Richardson's joined us as well from Clarendon as Director of Education. That's wonderful. And now I'm just going to share the screen again, and this time we're going to have, oh, well, wait a minute, I won't share the screen for a moment. I'll let you have the opportunity to see Leslie and who's going to speak to you. So do you want me to put the slides on right away, Leslie?
Please.
Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Greetings to you. Here we go. Well, that'd be really good if we could see it. Let's try again.
I can see it, Liz.
Can you?
I can't, and
Yeah.
I need
Leslie can't and she needs it. So this is really weird. Screen sharing, screen sharing.
Do slideshow, Liz, and see if it comes up.
Okay, Barrington, tell me what to do.
You're seeing your screen, Liz?
I'm seeing a completely black screen at the moment.
Oh.
Ah, I know why it is. It's because I hadn't got rid of my previous
Right.
sharing activity. Right, okay, I'm very sorry about this, but as you know, it's Friday the 12th, which is obviously my unlucky day. No, stop sharing. Right, okay. And here we are. Let's try again. Want to change your save those, right. Now, how are you doing? Can you see the life and times of Gifford Pennant this time?
Yes.
Yes. You
Yeah.
could slideshow now.
Glory, hallelujah. Thank you very much indeed, and excuse me saying that. Okay, so over to you then, Leslie. The life and times of Gifford Pennant, 1630 to 1677, and your research. Right. Okay, he was born in 1630 in Baglilt, Flintshire, Wales, to Edmund Pennant, aged 20, and Elizabeth Gifford, aged 14. So I had very young parents. Now that's my contribution. Now over to you, Leslie.
Okay. So if we look at this very bold statement for 1655, we see that Gifford Pennant, a military officer, arrived in Jamaica. However, if the events of the previous year had gone differently, we wouldn't be saying that today. Events could have taken a really disastrous diversion in 1644. The stimulus for that was Cromwell's Grand Western design. And basically, Cromwell wanted his army and his navy to go down to Jamaica and the Caribbean, generally the West Indies, and cause havoc for the Spanish. So in his plan, which was fairly secret to start with, his idea was to go down there and grab as much land as he could from the Spanish. So he sent Admiral Penn and General Venables with about 8,500 men off in 1654, and generally what was happening was that the two gentlemen did not get on. Their first brief was to go to Hispaniola. So under his charge, General Venables had 5 regiments, a lot of men, 3,500 left from England. They made their way over to Barbados, where they picked up another 3,500 men, in addition to about 1,000 to 2,000 of retrobates, ex-convicts, people who were just looking to go somewhere to get rich, because that is what they thought they were going to be doing. As it turned out, matters proved very differently. So when they arrived at Hispaniola after their long, lengthy journey, the two gentlemen, as I said, did not get on, and they couldn't decide on where to land. Admiral Penn decided he was not going to land at the capital city and took the fleet a journey of 2 days march away from the capital against Venables' wishes. They landed as many men as they needed onto the island and started an enforced march back to the capital to engage the enemy. Now, that wasn't a simple matter. What they were going through was forest and woodland and up and down ravines and gorges, very similar to what they would experience in Jamaica when they got there. However, these were men in English uniform, totally clothed unsuitable for an enforced march of 2 days. What made matters worse was that Admiral Penn had not given them any supplies to do this march. In addition to which, surprisingly or not surprisingly, according to how you read the accounts of these people, they also hadn't shipped any water bottles, so they had no means of carrying water with them, which meant by the time they got back to the capital 2 days later, about 1,000 men had fallen by the wayside for various reasons: heat exhaustion, dehydration, malaria had started kicking for some of them. When they arrived at the capital city of Hispaniola, intending to take it quite easily, they thought, they were met with a force which they could not engage with. And they were forced to simply march back to their ship and get on it and go away. Now, Penn and Venables found this was going to be quite embarrassing when they reported back to Cromwell. And so they decided that they would go somewhere easy, and they deemed Jamaica to be an easy place. It wasn't called that at the time, but that was where they went. So off they went to Jamaica. Now, 2 unfortunate things happened on the way. The first of which was the fact that a gentleman called Edward Winslow, who was their main help in setting up a colony in Jamaica, died. So they didn't have anybody else on board ship that knew how to settle an island. The other unfortunate thing that happened was 2 days before they arrived in Jamaica, Venables announced to his crew, his motley crew and his army, that there was to be no looting. Everything that was gained in Spain was to go back to Cromwell, which didn't go down well with the men, who were already embarrassed, hungry, because there were only half supplies on board the ship, thirsty because there wasn't enough water, in addition to which they hadn't been paid since they left England. Not that they could have spent their money anywhere, but they hadn't been paid. So when they arrived in Jamaica, these 2 gentlemen, Penn and Venables, made a couple of very serious mistakes, which had long-term lock-on effects when they got to the island. They arrived at the island in May and announced their arrival, and then waited 24 hours before they went offshore. When they got offshore and advanced to meet the enemy, it became very clear that having announced their arrival, the land was pretty sparse of people. Eventually, 24 hours later, the governor arrived, carried in a hammock because he had smallpox, and immediately surrendered. So Venables announced their terms. Their terms were that within 10 days, all of the Spanish would be prepared to leave the island. They would also provide provisions for the army, who were then very hungry, and they were to also supply 200 head of cattle. He agreed, but he was held hostage with 2 other men to make sure all of this happened. It became very clear after 4 days that the army and the navy had been hoodwinked. Because yes, 4 days supplies arrived, but on the 5th day, nothing did. So Venables marched his army into the city, which was the only large place on the island. And surprise, surprise, there was nobody there. They'd given the Spanish plenty of time to remove anything of value, to escape, and basically had hoodwinked the English, which wasn't very creditable. Another sad story to tell to Cromwell when they got home. So having arrived in the island with all these men, the first thing that happened was the men went on the rampage. They looted the houses, damaged them, pulled them down. They ravaged the cattle population on the island, which was simply let to run wild by the Spanish, killed them, had no thought to save any for food. It was a disastrous, disastrous arrival for the English. Knock-on effect of that was, because they'd rampaged through the island, they destroyed any crops that were there, and they literally had nothing to eat. So within 7 days, all of the men on the island were on half rations, which was 1 biscuit a day and water. In fact, matters got worse. By the following year, of the 8,200 troops who'd landed, their number had been reduced by reduced to 3,700. This huge contingent of men by 1660 was gone by 2000, was gone down to 2,200 eventually. Now, when they went to Jamaica, they thought that the island they were going to was going to be a lush island of provisions. Now, that actually wasn't the case, because the Spanish had only ever used the island as a cattle pen. They relied on Hispaniola for all the crops that they could provide, but all of the other outlying islands that they had invaded and taken over were simply used as pens to produce cattle, because the main reason they needed the cattle was because of their huge leather industry. So when they arrived in Jamaica, about 1,500 of them by 1655, it was not the island they were expecting to find. As I said, there were no provision grounds, in addition to which the army had thought that that was probably the only place that the Spanish might have hidden their gold and silver, so they had dug up the provisions and therefore ruined them. So it wasn't a very good and outcome at all, the landing. In terms of what they needed, to survive, they had to go in search of water. They had to learn how to grow their own crops. They had to try and capture some of this cattle that had been let loose by the Spanish. In addition to which, they had the Spanish to contend with still. They'd fled up into the mountains where there was an existing community of the original Tainos who had lived on the island, plus all of their enslaved workers who had, over the time, gone to be with them because they didn't accept or couldn't accept their treatment by the Spanish. Together, they actually picked off any of the troops who were venturing too far out of the city and were literally reducing them by numbers day by day. It was not an auspicious start to the island.
Oops. Right. Apologies.
In order to overcome this, Edward O'Doyle had a plan, and the plan was to invite buccaneers. He needed help. The colony simply could not cope with embedding themselves as a settlement and keeping the Spanish at bay. And the Spanish tried time and time again to get back their city, Spanish Town. We've got this title here, The Battle of Ocho Rios. It's a very, very large title for something that smaller happened, but basically the British and Spanish engaged in Ocho Rios and they were somewhat successful. But as always, the Spanish seemed to have a knack of, the remnant of the Tainos and the enslaved workers seemed to have a knack of just being able to disappear off into the mountains because they were used to the terrain. They knew where they could hide, and they did it very effectively because the British simply did not know the island as well as they did. So the following year is the Battle of Rio Nuevo, and this was the last serious attempt by the Spanish to engage the British to get back the island. Now, I was talking to the family historian, and he's of the opinion that Gifford actually fought at this battle. He was named in some papers as a captain of horse, and in others he's referred to as a colonel. And unfortunately, I can't find any evidence of that anywhere. Caroline, if you know of any evidence, I'd really be grateful to have it. However, what I do know is that of these regiments that Cromwell sent out, there were 60 officers. Now, I've got a list of those 60 officers, and Gifford's name is not there. However, there is a little category entitled staff officers. Now, if Gifford was a captain of horse and had gone out at the time of Cromwell, his name should be included there. However, that list is not available to me at the moment. It is available in the Jamaican archives if we can find someone to go and search it out for us. But as of this moment, Gifford's name is not on any of the lists of people who travelled out to Jamaica in the initial tranche of army in 1655. However, later on in the year, Cromwell sent out an additional 700 men, and he may well have been in that contingent. So we do know several times where the fact that he was a captain of horse is mentioned. But in later maps of the island, he's actually referred to as colonel. And I think that title has been won by him as a serving member of the militia of the island, because not only did the settlers have to learn how to settle an island because they had no help to do that, they also had to form their own militia to keep the Spanish at bay alongside the buccaneers.
Oops, Daisy, on to the next one.
So in 1660, they finally got rid of the Spanish, drove them out of Ocherias. And that coincided with the restoration of Charles II, which had them fairly jitterish because they weren't sure whether Charles II was actually going to recall them back to England. Some of them actually would have welcomed that, because trying to live on an island such as Jamaica is very, very difficult if you've gone totally unprepared. So bear in mind, they had the uniforms they stood up in when they arrived at the island. They didn't have any housing because they'd pulled it down foolishly. They had very little food until they started to grow their own. They had no defences against malaria, smallpox, yellow fever, which is why so many of the number were decimated. By 1661, you can see there the numbers of the people who were actually alive on the island. Now, quite early on, they did begin to form their government. They based it on Barbados, really, which was a successful English settlement. So it had a loose form of government in the shape of a governor. They had an assembly, and they had the beginnings of their settlements. Knowing that they were not being recalled back to England, those Roundhead soldiers who'd arrived finally began to turn their hand to agriculture, because there was no way they were going to exist if they didn't. In addition to which, Charles II promised lots of land and privilege to anybody who would go out and start to settle the island. And this is 6 years after the invasion. By 1663, the Maroons and the fugitives in the mountains were still giving them a huge problem. So Charles Lyttelton announced that he would give them the same state and freedoms as the English enjoy. Unfortunately, very few of them chose to take it up. So, having got rid of the Spanish, in order to settle, they had to get rid of the fugitives and the Maroons. And this was Lyttelton's way of he thought that he could do it. It wasn't very successful. And so, forward-looking, the Assembly was implementing its first statute for the government of the enslaved people, but they had started to accrue. Now, basically, what that meant was that if an enslaved worker did something wrong, the plantation owners, sorry, there weren't plantations yet, the owners of them had to get together and gather 3 other people and make a decision about the punishment that a slave would have. Because the Jamaican Assembly simply couldn't do it. They didn't have the governance in place to be able to make a judgment over whether an enslaved worker should live or die or get punished. Truthfully, they had so few enslaved workers, they couldn't afford to kill any of them. However, when Thomas Modiford was appointed Royal Governor, he was the man who really began to turn the island into a settlement, and the population exploded hugely. However, along came the Dutch and English War. They'd only just got through the last one, which ended in 1654. And this is when Modiford decided that what was really needed to keep the Dutch under control was for him and his buccaneers to go out and cause as many problems as they could on the Dutch islands locally. That was the concept of war. The Dutch islands were dotted all around the Caribbean, some further away than others. So basically, the buccaneers got on land, they raided the plantations, they burnt them, they stole their slaves, they harried them as much as possible. And it seems to have been a fairly good strategy, at least at that time, because by 1667, as you can see, that aggravation was finished. 1669 was an average year. This is the year that Gifford married Elizabeth Ordwickel. She too was substantially younger than Gifford. By now, some of the plantations had begun to produce sugar, but it was very little, as you can see, just 500 tonnes a year, which compares not very well when you consider, as it says there, by 1750, they were producing more sugar than any other islands combined. The main reason for that was because there were so few people on the island and they could not get enough slaves to come and work. If enslaved people are coming from Africa, Jamaica is almost the last island you can get to. So the enslaved people were being dropped off at other islands on the route, and poor Jamaica was not getting very many. In some years, it got no enslaved people at all. As a result of this, a lot of them are getting very, very dispirited and saw joining the buccaneers as a more lucrative way to get rich. They thought when they went out that they would be getting rich very quickly. They didn't, I think, for 1 minute think they were going to have to work hard, grow plants, produce sugar by themselves in order to get rich. So an easy way out was join the buccaneers and make some money quickly that way. However, Gifford seems to have stayed the course, and as you can see, he begins to start to accrue quite a bit of land. It's not the Denbigh area as we know it, because Thomas River isn't there, and Little River isn't there. And he gets woodland, savanna, and that's simply because that is what is there. There are no large areas of land in Clarendon yet producing enough agricultural products. So it's really starting from scratch. First of all, get your land. Secondly, clear it. Thirdly, learn how to plant a crop. Sugar was not that crop initially. Modiford persuaded all the small plantagers and those that had got their land from Cromwell to start small. He said, you can't start with a crop you don't know how to grow. Start small with what you do know and then progress upwards. So that's what they had to do. It was basically, until 1670, it was largely a question of survival, not expansion. Although the island was staked out, little of it was under cultivation. As you can see, just 57 sugar plantations, producing 1,000 hogcakes of sugar. A good plantation alone can later produce that amount of sugar. Again, here we've got a list of the lands that Charles II granted to Gifford. So 1671, 16 years after the invasion, he is still accruing land. He hasn't made any sugar yet. He doesn't know how to sugar. He has to learn. He has to learn how to grow sugar. Just as things are settling down, a third Anglo-Dutch war happens. You can see how all these distractions, all these irritations, the Maroons are still annoying them on a daily basis. You can see how this is hindering the cultivation of the island. And that is why the sugar crop is so slow to produce anything profitable. The one good thing on the horizon is that the Royal African Company's been formed, who came to have the monopoly for the slave trade. But it was at least a reliable monopoly. Jamaica began to get more and more slaves. Unfortunately, as fast as they got them, they were dying off because they really were not suited to life on Jamaica. Now, it's largely thought that when you bring an enslaved worker from Africa, you're bringing them into a country which is similar to their own. However, equipped as they are in their own country to cope with malaria, malaria in Jamaica was a vastly different thing when you're working to exhaustion, you don't have enough food to eat, or you don't have the food that you're used to, and you might have brought sickle cell with you, because it was the sickle cell that enabled the Africans to cope with malaria in their own country. Worked to exhaustion with very little food and getting soaked to the skin triggered all the bad effects of having a sickle cell in your body. So too, the Africans were being killed off by malaria as fast as they could be brought onto the island. Here we have a good event. Edward Douglas Pennant born, that's Gifford's son. He was the one that was going to take on the island's cultivation from his father. We have some more land given to Gifford for £50. Doesn't sound a lot of money, does it? It's quite a lot in those days. However, along comes something else that the settlers had to contend with. This is the very first slave rebellion, and it was in the north. Now, the north wasn't very well populated. The estates were scattered, but there were large numbers of enslaved workers who felt brave enough to attempt this rebellion, which meant basically they could easily escape to the mountains, and they did when the rebellion was thwarted, basically. The second rebellion came along a bit later. Here we have more land from Gifford coming along. I've not been able to identify this piece of land that he's given at the lower end of Macquarie Bay, but the other pieces of land that I've mentioned, they've all been well documented in the archives. So if you want to check up on any of this, you can access that. 1675, a big year. Charles II made a very displeasing appointment of Lord Vaughan, and Sir Henry Morgan, who was one of our buccaneers that had been sent away, he'd committed a big crime in the eyes of Charles II, decided to turn face and knighted him and sent him back as Vaughan's second in command. As you can see, Vaughan did not have a terribly good impression of the island. But here we are, we're 20 years later. There are only 6 parishes with churches, only 4 with clergymen, one of whom's the sole schoolmaster. At this point, Gifford acquires some land in Kings Valley, which is right down the West End, and seems an odd grant of land to acquire. In 1776, he gets a bit more. And unfortunately, it's at that point that he dies, leaving his widow. And significantly, Edward is just 4 years old, and Elizabeth is 6. She's just 2 years older than him. So really, this begs the question, Gifford's gone, Edward's only 4. How on earth are these plantations going to be carried on to be the successful plantations that we know? How on earth is that going to happen? Now, it's also very clear that because Gifford has arrived with the rest of them, with literally what he brought with him, he must have been supported from home with finances, with resources, in order for him to remain there all that time. And not one crop has been raised. So the answer to that will be in next week's instalment.
Well, Leslie, utterly amazing. Thank you so much. Leslie's done heaps of research. And as you practically lived in the archive at times and read up so much. So Leslie's pulled together all these thoughts and stories to try and try and make it work. So Barrington Richardson is sending waves and love, which is pretty amazing. Thank you very much indeed, Barrington, for that. Now, Barrington and Leslie met when Leslie was in Jamaica with the Welsh delegation last year. So amazing. So, okay then. So we're going to open the floor now. And Vivian's already got his hand up. So over to you, Vivian.
Yes, to thank Leslie most sincerely for the very insightful presentation. My God, every day we learn something new. I grew up that Gifford Pennant had arrived on the ship and given all this land in Clarendon. I'm hearing something different today, and I'm grateful for
It's
that.
a very untold story.
Sorry?
It is a very untold story.
It's a very untold story. You see, I also learned, tangential to your presentation, that when Penn and Venables, they were in Kingston Harbor, they told the officers as far as the eyes could see would belong to them. And Thomas Hope, Major Hope, who was on the ship, he could see as far as what we today call Newcastle. So in Jamaica, there's a river called the Hope River, which is named after him. And the whole of the Hope Estate, that's where the University of the West Indies, University of Technology, Hope Gardens are today, Hope Road. But I hasten to ask, though, with regard to the year 1663, if you could revisit that, 1663, where you said that Charles Littleton gave some freedom, Maroons and English.
Yes.
Just some clarification on that, because the freedom to the Maroons was only 1738, 1739.
Yeah, I've got that from reading, and that was his attempt to bring the enslaved refugees to heel, to stop them. So he was tempting them with that, so that they could begin to settle, because they were constant irritation to them.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have succeeded unless, as they say, you have a document, you have the terms of engagement.
Yeah.
Because, and I declare interest. I am descendant of Maroons.
Yeah.
So they have been so tricked that they were not going to take a chance unless, and perhaps, I don't know if in your research you noticed this, the Maroon Treaty was not signed with ink. Are you aware of that?
No.
Blood.
Well, actually, I just
OOD, you draw blood.
Yeah. And so if you're interested in that, I can give you the reference for that. I'll just need time to find it for you.
No, I don't question. Oh, no, I don't question your presentation.
No, it's
Paige, I love you. I just think it is wonderful.
because you're there.
Yes, but when I went to the institute and I saw the fern, not a pen that was used to do the signing, I said, but in our childhood, we had this fern in Portland and it abounds there. And I remember it in my brothers and my people in my district in the war years when you couldn't get pen from England, that was the stem of that fern. It's very sharp. That was used. So you stick the blood, stick the hand, and then the blood was used to sign the treaty. And it was signed with an X. So I was so happy when I saw that 1663, because the treaty wasn't, the Maroons we were continually in hiding. And this is why Liz knows that we do not eat curried goat. Because goats gave us away when we were in hiding. They told the British where we were.
So that was the British first attempt to get the Maroons and the fugitives on side. And as I said,
it wouldn't work.
No.
Because the Maroons, they were from Africa, and they were independent and freed people. So they were not, and Britain's aim, when you spoke, for instance, about the churches, I laughed, and there was one school. That was never on the agenda for Eton College here in Jamaica. The role of Jamaica was to produce sugar. Please. It was never intended that the water, we were to muddy the water. Boy,
No,
you evoke my curiosity.
As soon as you've got wives and children coming along, you need a school and you need a church, etc.
They sent them abroad. They sent them abroad. They sent them abroad. Because I spoke on this program about perhaps Jamaica's most famous doctor, Dr. Cicely Williams. Cicely Williams. Her father was director of education, Englishman. And I have a grouse with him because in 1900, and in my time at school, I was subjected to it. All the boys had to go and do gardening on a Tuesday and a Thursday afternoon from 1 o'clock until 4 o'clock, gardening. Now, the children we would have all been accustomed to gardening, because that's the only thing we knew our parents did. Why the heavens would we have to be subjected to that? And the girls had to do sewing Tuesday and Thursday from 1 to 4. I'm saying this to say that his daughter, Cicely, at age 13, was sent to Bath in England, to school, not in Jamaica, because Jamaica wouldn't have the facility. We had their high schools, yes, but he didn't trust them with the standard. And he was director of education, Williams from Westmoreland. So he sent Cicely to Bath. She did very well, on to Oxford. Fortuitously, there was World War I, and they didn't have enough men at Oxford. So she got obliged. She was able to go in. And she did exceptionally well. I recall as a student at the university, the year when she was awarded an honorary degree. In Jamaica, I remember where she stayed, and her remains are in Westmoreland, but it was who found out in Africa a sickness that was caused by having children malnutrition and having milk powder and so on, the damage it would cause because of absence of the breast milk. And she worked also in Malaysia. She was incredibly wonderful. Returned to Jamaica in 1951 to help with vomiting sickness caused by ackee poisoning. Enough of me.
Yeah. So rewind 350 years, Vivian, and you have to imagine that they're simply making it up as they go along. They haven't come to the island to grow and cultivate. They've come to rape and pillage.
Wow.
So they've got nobody at the helm forward planning for longevity. They're just making it up as they go along. The
Wow.
governance is low profile. They're making that up as they go along. Till along comes the governor who actually takes control and decides, right, this is what works in Barbados. This is what we're going to implement here. And that was the first time that anybody had taken charge of a long-term plan for the island.
But
So
what you're telling us now, you know, most of us are hearing this only now. Because in our time, we were never, you know, Tony Gifford.
Vivian, tip your screen down so it's easier for us to see you and then we can hear. That's
Now,
better.
I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I'm asking if you know Tony Gifford, Lord Gifford, Anthony Gifford.
I know of him, but I don't.
Yes, you can Google him.
Yeah.
But he told me if you that what you just said, if you were to hear that, he would get emotional and cry.
Would he?
Because oh yes, he went to Winchester. And he said he was never taught what you are saying now in school. And as an adult in House of Lords, he went to Abuja to a conference. And when he heard what you just said, the overview, he cried, and he was sitting beside me here in Jamaica, and he was crying. And I said to him, I shared it with Liz last week, that we had a meeting with Tony. He's now back in England, and he, like me, we're a member of the Reparation Council. And I told Tony he has a streak, the DNA of being rebellious in him, because at Winchester College, his teacher, his principal, was a Bishop Ken. And Bishop Ken did something which his neck could go on the gallows, because you were not allowed to put music to hymns unless the words were directly taken from the Bible. And he defied the tradition and wrote the hymn, "Glory to thee, my God, this night, for all the blessings of the light." So I told Tony he has that rebellious streak in him. But what you're saying, what you just said, has evoked so much in me that I could spend 3 weeks just talking with you. Enough of me.
Hope you're going to get the opportunity at some stage. That's absolutely fantastic. So I'm really interested. So Governor Charles Littleton was trying out some ideas to get give people the same state and freedom of the English enjoy, which obviously didn't work. And then the following year, we'd got Sir Thomas Modiford appointed as the royal governor. And he was the one who seemed to pull it in the right direction. Now, the reason I'm interested in this, and this is personal, is that I lived in a little village in Worcestershire called Blakedown, next to a village called Hagley. And Hagley has a large park called Hagley Park. And Governor Charles Littleton's family were the people who had that land. It was their area, the Littletons of Hagley Park. Now, another Littleton comes into the story later when Leslie's talking further down the line, because he was also a governor. So I think that's really interesting. And then you think, how did this bloke who came from the village next to mine in the heart of Worcestershire, how would he have known anything about managing the situation they got themselves into, trying to do down the Spanish? Just absolutely fascinating. So I really have to thank Leslie so much for simplifying all of this and making it accessible to those of us who aren't academic historians, so we can begin to explore it. So I don't know if any of the others of you have got any points you want to make. We've got Caroline with us. Caroline's an experienced researcher into the Pennant family history and Penrhyn Castle. We've got Catherine from Museum and we've got Barrington Richardson, who's very active with our tithe project at the moment and exchange visits. So I don't know if any of you have got any points that you want to raise. Caroline? You have to unmute yourself, Caroline.
That was very interesting, Leslie. Thank you. I don't know much about the very early Pennants. I know most of them were about Richard Pennant and so on. So that was very useful to hear that background. I knew he'd been given land by Cromwell, but I wasn't sure much more beyond that.
Well, Caroline, the interesting thing is that when Gifford died, in his will, it says he had 7,500 acres of land.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if you've computed what I've put down on the slides, but it's nowhere near 7,500 acres of land. So it's clear and backed up by reading that when they got onto the island and obviously needed to start to provide for themselves, they must have been given land by Venables. No, that couldn't have been. It couldn't have been Venables because he shipped back home as quick as he could to tell his story to Cromwell. So whoever was in charge of the island had probably just said, go and stake out a bit of land and have it. And the island had no governance the first 4 or 5 years. So there was nobody to say, legally, that's not yours or it is yours. So that must be part of the acreage of land which is missing from the statistical evidence that I have. It makes sense, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine life on the island being pretty chaotic for at least 10 years. Yeah.
I think the point you make about taking the model of Barbados and applying that is interesting, because in order to do that and in order to make anything out of the island, then the workforce was needed, and enslaved Africans were already being taken to other islands by the Spanish. So it was kind of coming in on that. And then you identified the date that the Royal Africa Company was established, so that the profits from the slave trade would be managed through that entity. So it's really fascinating. And one other thing you said fascinated me was how on earth did these few people manage to do anything? And you said probably family was sent from abroad. So I wonder how many other Welsh people, considering all the number of Welsh names there are in Jamaica, how many Welsh people were sent for to come and try and help bail out the situation that Gifford Pennant had got himself into.
Yeah.
Probably something we don't know about, but...
Well, there are lots of questions that I've simply not been able to find the answer to. I've really exhausted all the limits of my possible research at the moment. But the thing that I really want, first and foremost, is to get hold of that list of the staff officers in the Jamaican archives and see if Gifford's name is there.
Well, maybe we can help with that, and Vivian, with your contacts, and Barrington, I'm sure we can support that request of Leslie. I'm fascinated as well by your comments on sickle cell. I didn't understand about that, and that's really insightful into the dreadful difficulties and challenges that the African people must have had. Vivian?
Yes, it is. It should be understood. And I don't know if in our schools in Jamaica that it's understood that way. It was not the British who started enslavement. It was the Spaniards who brought the Africans here. And that is sometimes overlooked. The British accelerated the process when they saw that sugar, and sugar is an addiction, by the way, sugar, tobacco, they're all addictions. And there was a demand, economists will tell you, supply. So here we go, yes. But everything that you said this morning, Carla, evoked my curiosity. Yeah, you.
I'll send you a book list.
Oh, please. It's just. So what? Sorry, could you share with us, Carl? I know you lecture. You're a lecturer. Are you a lecturer?
Me?
Yes.
No, I'm retired now. I used to teach.
Oh, no, I sorry.
I used to volunteer at Penman Castle, and I worked there for 3 years as well as a member of the learning team.
Oh, okay.
Caroline has always had a real interest locally. She isn't living in Wales at the moment, but she was living near Penrhyn Castle and had an absolute fascination for it. I'm right in saying that, aren't I, Caroline? And
Yeah, I did lots of research into the history of the house that I was living in because it was part of the Penrhyn Castle estate.
Okay. I just wanted to with what what's going on, so.
Caroline also supported the research project for 2007 when a really wonderful exhibition was pulled together that really told the story of Penrhyn Castle's connection with the enslavement of so many Africans, and the activities of the family in Jamaica. And maybe one day, Caroline, we might even get as good an exhibition installed again at Penrhyn Castle, but installed permanently because the story does need to be told. So Caroline is a very good informal researcher, aren't you, Caroline? You find out all sorts of bits and
I enjoy it. Yes.
you'll put
Yeah,
you on the
yes.
case. Right, now we've got a message here from Barrington to say, thank you, Leslie, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and research. I'm learning a lot from you and through these ongoing Black History conversations. Barrington, we're very grateful for your support and help, and that's a lovely comment, Leslie.
Thank you, Barrington.
And thank you, Vivian, very much for your comments. Thank you for joining us as well, Caroline and Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciated it.
Okay, lovely. So here we are taking steps along, trying to untangle this history about which is often just mentioned as Gifford Pennant went to Jamaica, he was master of the horse, and as if he sort of instantly took over, managed plantations. It wasn't a bit like that, was it? And he must have been good friends with that Henry Morgan, as well, because there's places in Pennants, near Pennants, that have got Henry Morgan's connections. So we're going to carry on with this story next week. Now, we've never done this before. We've never done a series before. So we're going to do 3 weeks.
Leslie will be back next week.
Leslie will be back next week. And we're going to be hearing about little Edward, aged 4, when his father died. And he wasn't living in a great house. I don't know where he must have been living.
Spanish Town.
Spanish Town.
They lived in Spanish Town.
Right. Okay, then. So we'll hear about that next week. So thanks very much to everyone. Thank you, Simon, for being a brilliant host for us. Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine, very much indeed. Thank you, Carol. I'm just going to do a screenshot of you all looking so good. Hang on 1 minute. All right, so we'll have everybody with a big smile on their face. All right, then for this. Come on, Caroline, wake up. Right, okay. There we are. Lovely. Thank you so much, everybody. That's really, really lovely. Okay, bye for now then, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, Leslie.